Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
This is playing out amid remaining concerns in Washington about whether or not China could potentially access U.S. tech via the Gulf. And this obviously isn't a new concern. This was also a major storyline under the Biden administration. Under the Trump administration, we've seen sort of the strategy change somewhat dramatically because Trump and his key advisors see the Gulf as not only key partners, but also key customers of U.S. tech. And that's sort of, an opening to cement America's tech dominance.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is set to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House on Tuesday. It will be the first visit for the de facto Saudi leader to the U.S. since 2018, and is seen in and of itself as a victory for the kingdom after a cooling of relations during the Biden administration. MBS's visit comes after Trump's trip to the kingdom in May, during which deals worth around $600 billion were announced, and amid Saudi Arabia's push to become an AI hub. However, the pledges in May, which focused on AI and chips, have not been finalized, making the future of U.S.-Saudi tech ties uncertain, despite Trump's friendship with the Saudi Crown Prince. At the same time, low oil prices, though a boon for Trump, are hindering Saudi Arabia's plans for diversification and mega-projects. In this episode, we hear from Al Monitor's senior market research analyst, Sam Wendel. Sam takes us through why Trump is moving ahead with the Saudi deals despite concerns over China's access to sensitive technology, the Gulf's potential to become an AI hub, and what will determine the trajectory of U.S.-Saudi tech ties in the near future. Hope you enjoy. Sam, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Sam, you write in your upcoming analysis that much of MBS's trip to the White House will focus on AI. What do you think Saudi Arabia needs the most from the U.S. in its quest to become a hub for artificial intelligence?
What Riyadh needs primarily is access to advanced U.S. designed semiconductors, specifically AI chips made by NVIDIA and advanced micro devices. This is the hardware that's sort of underpinning the AI boom. And, U.S. designed chips are leading the way here currently. And Gulf states have very proactively, including Saudi Arabia, have very proactively been seeking these chips. And, that was on display during U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to the Gulf in May, where you saw U.S. tech giants, including NVIDIA and AMD, strike major, billion-dollar deals to supply these chips. Yep, Trump gave the green light here, but we've since seen that these agreements have yet to really translate into final sales, or shipments of chips to the Gulf. And, these delays, like it or not, could potentially imperil Saudi Arabia's AI ambitions and that of the United Arab Emirates. Riyadh needs these chips to sort of power up its AI ambitions. They can't make them themselves. And, we're in a world where, you have the US and China leading the AI boom and everyone else is sort of following. And there's an opening for other countries or regions to kind of become the third or fourth AI hub. And Gulf states are well positioned to do that right now. But in order to achieve that, they need chips. And we've seen Gulf capitals are kind of aligning within America's AI orbit under Trump. So this visit by MBS is sort of a crucial opportunity to kind of advance those chip sales.
And going back to that May trip, as you noted, a lot of the AI chip deals announced at the time of Trump's visit have yet to be finalized. What do you think are the main challenges facing such deals and their implementation?
Yeah, so, based on what we know, the main obstacles are, holding up chip deals are, export clearances, which, this is playing out amid remaining concerns in Washington about whether or not China could potentially access U.S. tech via the Gulf. And this obviously isn't a new concern. This was also a major storyline under the Biden administration, which saw the U.S. place Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and the UAE, sort of or place limits on the amount of chips they could access. Yet under the Trump administration, we've seen sort of the strategy change somewhat dramatically because Trump and his key advisors see the Gulf as not only key partners but also key key customers of U.S. tech, and that's sort of an opening to cement America's tech dominance via close partnerships with the Gulf. And this again was on display in May when Trump visited. As we saw these major deals, and despite lingering concerns in Washington, he greenlit these deals. But this is also kind of plays into the larger Trump administration strategy of striking deals and kind of hashing out the details later. And that's what we've been seeing over the last 6 months. And this is where it's worth noting that Microsoft earlier this month revealed that in September it had gotten the first, or it had become the first company to receive a clearance to export chips to the UAE, advanced NVIDIA chips to the UAE. However, the caveat is that they're being used in Microsoft's own data centers, while local companies, including AI conglomerate G42, still don't have access. And that's despite the fact that G42 struck a strategic partnership with Microsoft under the Biden administration, which reportedly included, a commitment to divest from Chinese tech. And so that's, I think, an interesting example to watch because we could see something similar at play with Saudi Arabia here, specifically with its new state-backed AI startup Humane, which has signaled that it's willing to divest from Chinese tech in order to access American, chips. But it remains to be seen whether or not Saudi Arabia thinks that it should be able to only access American chips under these sort of strict guidelines, as we're seeing in the UAE. But it's also potentially just a stepping stone to broader sales.
And conversely, how attractive is investment in the U.S. to Saudi Arabia? And do you think Trump will need to do any convincing of his own towards MBS to pump more money into the American economy?
I mean, it's very attractive to Saudi and also the UAE and other Gulf states. But this is something that's consistent across administrations. I mean, U.S. investments are both profitable in terms of bottom line returns for Gulf states, specifically sovereign wealth funds, but also in terms of political capital. And so the U.S. is a top destination for Gulf capital, and that's likely to continue. But sort of the optics have changed a little bit under Trump, wherein we've seen massive Gulf commitments to invest in the United States. In Saudi Arabia's case, it was to the tune of 600 billion. And also ahead of this trip, we're seeing reports that, for example, Saudi Aramco plans to strike U.S. LNG deals alongside potential for other deals in AI and other sectors. But this trend also was seen during the Biden administration as well. I would say, including in energy, wherein the UAE and Saudi Arabia both signaled interest in U.S. energy assets under a completely different administration. The big difference here, and sort of a main challenge for MBS, is being able to kind of live up to these lofty commitments, because these are massive pledges that, quite frankly, in the short term, they don't have the bandwidth, the financial firepower to actually achieve. And so what I'm sort of watching here is, how do Gulf states, specifically Saudi Arabia in this instance, sort of continue to boost U.S. ties under Trump, but in a way that doesn't break the bank. Because these investment commitments are a source of leverage, but when the targets get so high, they start to lose a little bit of their feasibility. And that's what we're kind of seeing right now.
That's a good transition to the last question, which is about oil, which is something that affects Saudi Arabia in particular. Oil prices are relatively low, below $65 a barrel earlier today. And that's largely because of the increased production from OPEC Plus and the U.S. How do you think these oil prices are affecting Saudi Arabia's engagement with the U.S. on tech and business? And is there any friction between Trump and MBS on this issue?
Well, it's a good question. And obviously, oil prices were sort of a rare source of friction between Trump and MBS during his first term. But I think the dynamics have changed a little bit since then. Trump obviously wants to bring down oil and gas prices to sort of, boost his domestic popularity. But this is also something that sort of low oil prices also clash with Saudi Arabia's, economic priorities. And, as you mentioned, prices have been under $70 a barrel for most of 2025, and Saudi Arabia's, forecasted fiscal break-even prices around $90 a barrel. So we're way beneath that. And this also comes as OPEC Plus has been unwinding production cuts recently to help them gain market share. And that's partially to gain market share back from U.S. producers that have really sort of kind of been growing a lot recently. And so that combination is kind of raising the fear of a supply glut heading into next year. Now, at the same time, OPEC has also sort of signaled recently that they may sort of pause these supply increases in the first 3 months of 2026, which, they're citing seasonal demand fluctuations. But it's also worth seeing whether or not those cuts could continue. The outlook here is a little fuzzy, but at the same time, I'm not sure we're seeing the same, friction that we saw during between MBS and Trump that we saw during their first term. And at the same time, as I mentioned before, Aramco is signaling that they may invest further in U.S. energy assets, which, would be welcome news to the Trump administration.
Sam, thanks a lot for your time, and we look forward to more of your analyses on these issues.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Adam.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.